Hi everybody, in this video we will be going over the StepTracker problem solution, the one that does not use a list. So in this problem we have to make a StepTracker class. Inside this class we need to put four things. Of course we need some type of data fields, but we will also need a constructor and then these three methods: add daily steps, active days, and average steps. Let's start first with the constructor. So let's look at the constructor call. StepTracker TR equals new StepTracker 10,000. It looks like we have one parameter here, which we will definitely need. This parameter is supposed to represent the minimum number of steps that I need in order to be considered active for that day. So let's write the constructor first. Since this is the StepTracker class, we'll write that public class StepTracker. We will have to put in some data fields here. I don't know what they are yet, but we definitely need them, and we declare those at the top. Let's leave that blank for now, and let's start with our constructor. So, in our constructor, we have to say public, and remember, do not say a return type. So not void, not int, nothing, no return type at all, just public and then the name of the class, which our class name is StepTracker, so make sure that matches with the name of the class. As I stated, it takes in an integer parameter symbolizing the minimum number of steps I need to be considered active. So let's do that. We'll call this int, and then College Board call this variable threshold, but you could call this whatever you want. You could call it steps, whatever you need. Now, normally, when we take in a parameter from the constructor call, we will usually want to store that parameter so that it becomes a property of our object. So in this case, I need to figure out the minimum number of steps I need in order to be considered active. So let's add that data field. Private int and min steps. So this is the minimum number of steps I need to be considered active. Then I will set my data field to become the value of the parameter. So data field becomes or equals my parameter, which is threshold. Inside my constructor, I'm also going to end up initializing the values of the other data fields. So here I'm going to initialize the other data fields. Right now, there are no other data fields, but I might end up adding some in the future, so we might need to add some additional code to the constructor. With this in mind, let's focus on some of the methods. So we've got add daily steps. Let's start there. So here's the call for it. Add daily steps takes in an integer, and that, I guess, symbolizes the number of steps we took that day. In this case, it is not considered an active day because 9,000 is not greater than or equal to 10,000. Here's another call. 5,000. Well, that's not greater than or equal to 10,000, so that's not considered an active day. But in this call to add daily steps, 13,000, that is greater than or equal to 10,000, so this represents an active day. We may not be able to do much with that yet, but let's at least write the method header. So it looks like it takes in an integer as a parameter, so let's put that in. So public definitely needs maybe some type of return type for the method. This is called add daily steps, and it takes an integer. We'll just call this steps. Now, what is our return type? Well, if you look at the problem, add daily steps does not return a value. So in this case, since it returns nothing, this is going to be void. So far this looks pretty typical of one of our mutator methods. So I'll just put that right here. You don't need to, but this could be helpful in terms of figuring out the solution. We're probably going to do something with steps. We're not sure what we're going to do yet, so let's actually go on to another method. Let's go to active days. Active days returns the number of active days we have. So let's do that. That's probably going to be an accessor method. Let's take a look at this. Active days, here it returns 0 because 9,000 and 5,000 are not active days because they're not greater than or equal to 10,000. But if we go down here, active days will return 1 because 13,000 was an active day because it's greater than or equal to 10,000. So now so far we have 1 active day. And then if we look here, 23,000 is an active day because it's greater than or equal to 10,000, but 1111 is not an active day because it's not greater than that number. So far it looks like we have not this, 1, 2 active days. So active days will just return 2. Let's do the method header for active days. So this is clearly our accessor method. And so we'll go ahead and do public, some return type, active days. Does it take in parameters? Nope, nothing in the parentheses, so we're good. But it does return something. What data type do you think it returns? It's returning the number of days, so that's not going to be a decimal, that's an integer. So we'll just write public int active days. And it's going to return the number of active days. We don't know what that is yet, but I have a feeling we're probably going to have to keep track of that. So let's go ahead and just do return num active days because that's what we need to keep track of. So I'm probably going to need that as my data field. So let me copy and paste that, and we will put that up here in my data fields. Private int num active days. I just copy and pasted it from down here. This name has to be the same as this. Now, we may not know how to calculate num active days yet, but it doesn't necessarily seem like we're calculating it here. So let's look at this. In add daily steps, it's actually calculating the number of active days. So when it's less than 10,000, it's 0. When it's less than 10,000, it's 0. But down here in add daily steps, if it's greater than 10,000, it's 1. So one thing that you might think about is if the number of steps taken that day is greater than or equal to the minimum number of steps we need, then we increment it, otherwise we don't. So don't increment the data field, don't increment it for this one because that one is greater than or equal to the minimum number of steps. Do we have data fields for that? I think we do. We have min steps, which is the minimum number of steps that we set in our constructor. Whoops, let's get rid of that. Min steps, again, is the minimum number of steps that we set in our constructor right here. So I think we actually use add daily steps to calculate this. So let's do this. If the number of steps I took that day, what's the number of steps I took that day? Well, it's that value inside the parameter. If this is bigger than the minimum number of steps, then we'll do something. So if steps, which is my parameter, is greater than or equal to the minimum number of steps that I need to take in order for it to be an active day, then I should say, okay, this was an active day, so I will just do this data field num active days plus plus so that it goes up by 1. So far, that's what I have for add daily steps. Let's continue on. So, when I do this problem, I still need to also calculate the average number of steps. So, let's look at average steps. It returns the number of average steps per day calculated by dividing the total number of steps taken by the number of days tracked. This actually gives you a really big clue as to what we need. We need to calculate the total number of steps taken and the number of days tracked. So I'm actually going to make those my data fields for average steps. Private int, we'll call this total steps. We need a total to calculate the average. We also need to figure out how many days we have been using our step tracker. So again, calculated by dividing the total number of steps, total steps, divided by the number of days tracked, num days. So we will go ahead and use this to calculate our average. Let's start with our method header. So, average steps. Looks like it has no parameters, but it's going to return some type of decimal. So, because it's returning a decimal, we will say public double, and then our method name, which is average steps. Alright, we need to calculate the number of average steps. So typically what we'll do is we will just need to take, it says in the problem, dividing the total number of steps taken by the number of days. So let's just go with that. Total number of steps, that's my data field up here, total steps. And divided by the number of days. Maybe I'll just end up returning that value. Now this mostly works. We'll just keep that right there. This mostly works, but there's a couple problems. So first of all, total steps and num days are both integers. So in order for me to get a proper average, remember that the fact that integer divided by integer is an integer. So 1 divided by 3 is not 0.3, it's just 0. In order to make it a decimal, I have to go ahead and do like 1.0 divided by 3. So decimal divided by integer is a decimal. So that's why I have to typecast this as a double. I'm going to erase this other stuff here. Whoops, in 3, 2, 1. Another thing we have to keep in mind is, give me just a minute to fix this. There we go. So another thing we have to keep in mind is the divide by 0 error. So we cannot have the denominator of a fraction equal 0. So let's think about what happens here. If our denominator is num days, so if num days is 0, so if we haven't had any days on this, we need to do something about that. Let's take a look at the problem. So here, the number of days was 0 because we didn't log any days into the step tracker, so it's just returning 0.0. So I think that's what we should do. If we have a 0 denominator, we'll just return 0.0. Otherwise, we'll return double total steps divided by num days. It looks like we have most of this done. The only problem is, how do I accumulate the total number of steps and the number of days? Well, let's try to think what method we were accumulating those in. Total steps and num days. Where did those change? I think that they seem to be changing in add daily steps, because you add 9,000 to the total, you add 5,000 to the total, which is 14,000. And then you also divide by how many days there are, which is 2. So really, you should probably have an incrementer for the number of days as well. So basically, to change total steps and num days as we add on new steps. So as we add 9,000 to the mix, we will add 9,000 to the total and also increment the number of days up by 1. If we add 5,000 steps here, we add that to the total and increment the number of days up by 1, so it's now 2. And the total would be 9,000 plus 5,000. So let me do that and add daily steps. I will go ahead and just say, so my field for total steps, so total steps plus equals the number of steps that we took in the parameter, because that's what we did right here. Also, we want the number of days to go up by 1. So I'll take num days, put it down here, and then plus plus. And that is pretty much it. Oh, what else do we need to do? Oh, I forgot. This is pretty much done, but we also need to initialize these other data fields, because now that we're done, we initialized min steps, but we never initialized those. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So I will take num active days. Now when I first make a step tracker, there are no active days. Oops, this should say num active days. So that will be 0. Let's do total steps. So total steps, that will also equal 0. And then num days, well, when we first make a step tracker, no days have passed, and there have been no steps recorded. So that is pretty much the entirety of the problem. I'm going to zoom out just so that you can see the whole thing. And there we go. Now it all fits on one page. I deleted some of the comments so that it would fit on one page. This is the actually exact same solution that the College Board released. So feel free to look at College Board's solution as well. And that's pretty much it for this video. See the other videos for other answers and for other hints to this problem. Thank you.